Welcome to Dave and Dom Demystify, a FinTech Futures podcast, helping make sense of the world of FinTech and digital finance. Please sit back and listen as the two Ds take a subject and discuss it to make it clearer and easier to understand.
Demystifying.
Welcome to today's show, and today we have Eddie Harrison, CPO for Navro, joining us. Eddie, why don't you introduce yourself and tell us a bit about Navro?
Hey, so I'm Eddie. I'm the CPO and co-founder of Navro. We're a payments business specifically focused on solving two problems for e-commerce platforms, marketplaces, and other online businesses. Specifically, how do they collect money in countries where they don't operate or have local banking relationships? And how do they send money around the world in what is historically a very fragmented and messy global infrastructure?
Do you also solve a problem for SaaS companies? Because my previous startup, Ask Homey, we wanted to start collecting payments, especially monthly subscriptions. And I found it phenomenally hard to do that. And then when we did find solutions, they were pretty expensive. Is that a problem you can solve as well?
We're slightly downstream. So I think if you think of payments for most complex businesses today, they typically have three elements. One is how they get the money in, the payment acceptance piece. And that's historically solved by the Stripes, the Adyens, the Checkouts, the Zuoras, the Go Cardlesses of the world. And then you have the part where it's like the light banking infrastructure. If you're in your domestic market, it's really easy because you've opened an account with Barclays and you don't need anything else. But the moment you venture out of your domestic market, it gets messy and you have to decide, well, do I go and open a bank account in every country? And if I do that, do I have to open an entity in every country, create a tax liability, hire people, which isn't always acceptable for fast scaling businesses. And then the third part is the payouts. How do you send money, whether that's to suppliers around the world, to marketplace sellers, or just repatriating funds to yourself? And so the parts that Navro solve are not the collect payment acceptance piece. We're not an acquirer, but it's everything that happens after that. So you can work with an acquirer and we can give you a Swedish krona account, or we can give you a Singapore dollar account. What's kind of unique about what we're trying to do is we don't give you a Swedish krona account, which is in London, which isn't actually that helpful. We give you a Swedish krona account in Sweden that's tapped into the Swedish market, and then you can embed it in all of your payment flows. And then we can take care of all the downstream payouts afterwards.
Thank you for clarifying that.
We've just done a funding round a while ago, so that's probably why it's rolling off the tongue quite well.
Well, maybe we should call it a day on the podcast now, seeing as Benny, how are you able to do that? I mean, I guess this is a problem which is a known problem which has kind of beset businesses for time immemorial. So how have you managed to kind of get around it? And how are you setting up these accounts in sort of other countries so that they can be used by your customers?
Yeah, so it all comes down to quality. And if you look at payments, and as you would have seen in the past, payments can be quite accessible in some places. I liken it to, I don't know if you've ever been to one of these all-you-can-eat buffet restaurants where they have multiple different cuisines, and you can have, effectively at the end of it, you can be dipping a Yorkshire pudding in a tikka masala while some wasabi is floating around and merging with gravy. And it's a bit of an abomination, but if you're 12 years old, it's fantastic because you get everything around the world on one plate. You probably have terrible indigestion the next day.
As long as there's a marshmallow chocolate fountain, you've got...
Yeah, there's definitely, reminds me of that Alan Partridge sketch with his 9-inch plate where he brings it along. And the problem is, if you go there 10 years later and you take a girl there on a date, it doesn't quite cut it. You need a better restaurant than what you've got there. And a lot of payments infrastructure in the world at the moment is like that all-you-can-eat buffet. It's lots of low-grade access. It's cheap, or in some cases still expensive. But you get a lot of access quickly, but it's not the high quality. And if you have high quality problems, or if you're trying to optimize your costs behind the scenes and you're at that stage where it's not just about growth for all expense, it's actually about how do we do this well, then you need to go to a Japanese restaurant or you need to go to a steakhouse. So part of what Navro is doing is trying to get you access to those best restaurants, which in our case is the best banks globally. The second part is you need to know what to order on the menu, because it is possible to go to a really nice restaurant and still order burger and chips when someone else is like, why haven't you ordered the Chateaubriand? So for us, try not to stretch the analogy.
No, stop because I'm getting hungry.
Yeah. We want to give businesses access to the best restaurants and tell them how to order and what to order on it. That's what we call curation. I feel like orchestration, other areas are fantastic, but it is like an all-you-can-eat buffet. We want to do a more kind of fine dining experience where it's not a multi-currency IBAN in 28 currencies off a Lithuanian bit code. It is a Swedish account in Sweden. It's a Singapore account in Singapore. Right down to the point where when you think of IBAN discrimination, it's a real problem still. And whether the EU says it's illegal or not, you can't change what people decide to do when they send money to somewhere. And sometimes people just in Italy go, doesn't begin with IT, so I'm not sending it. We can give customers an Italian IBAN. We can give customers an Austrian IBAN. So it's a quality solution. We're able to do it because of the regulatory journey we've gone on, and also the banking partners we've connected to. Before we even started Navro, we went to the best banks in the world, and we also went to the biggest customers and said, what does good look like? And they gave us a shopping list, which was, well, you need to be regulated, ideally by someone like the Central Bank of Ireland. And then we went to the Central Bank of Ireland and said, how do we get regulated by you as our first move out the gate? And they were like, you need these 10 people that are all super qualified. You need really good funds and really good capital adequacy. So then you go back to the investors and say, this is our vision, but we need these banks, this regulation, and your money.
I mean, that's fascinating.
And then we're off to the races,
that
hopefully.
you go on just for regulation. I mean, it kind of explains why it's not that quick to launch a payments entity, let alone a bank. How long does the process take?
Yeah, always longer than you would like, but we got our license with the CBI in close to record time. It took us about a year. Normally when you speak to people, they'll say 18 months to 24 months. The reason it takes people longer is if they don't take it seriously. They hire one person and they get told that's not enough. They need 3 people and they kind of do it last minute. We largely front-loaded the right team and the right structure at the front. So every time the regulator came back and said, hey, you guys are doing great, this is fantastic, but I need you to do this to get through to the next stage, we just slip a paper and said, we've already done it. We already planned it because we consulted with the right people. It's still very hard. And as you both would have seen, regulators are getting tougher on certain business models and the bar for entry is getting higher. So it only makes it harder for new entrants. But we took the decision very early that we didn't want to launch, and this is no disrespect to the business model because many days I'm very envious of it. We didn't want to launch on someone else's license as an agent and someone else's tech stack or infrastructure. We wanted to build our own from scratch so that it would stand the test of time and we wouldn't have to go back and do all that work in 5 years' time.
Can I ask, I mean, it's probably a really dumb question, but why Ireland? I mean, I guess UK based. When people say you got to go to Ireland for the license, why there?
Yeah, so we also have one in the UK as well, by the way. We have an EMI license with the FCA, which again is harder to get than it was a few years ago for sure. But Ireland, a couple of reasons. One is I don't speak any other languages, so it's quite a bit easier. 2, the level of financial infrastructure there. When you think of the banks that are there in terms of Citi and JP Morgan, the auditors that are there in terms of Deloitte and PwC, it is a hub in its own right. There's probably a short list of 3 or 4 places you could go to that are really deemed high quality. Netherlands is up there. France is up there. Again, I don't speak French, so I'm probably going to fail miserably at that one. And Ireland just made sense from a lot of ways. We're also blessed that we'd worked in the past with some great people in Ireland. So we actually had a bit of a head start on who we could bring in as a GM or managing director or CEO or chief compliance officer. And getting regulated, half the battle is finding those people. And we had a bit of a short list and serendipitously they were in Ireland. That was also a gold standard location. So it would have kind of been insane for us to go anywhere else.
Can I ask, did you consider Lithuania? by any chance?
No, and it's nothing against the regulators in Lithuania or any of the other markets. It probably, you can get a license a little bit quicker and with a little bit less uplift on the team. I think the challenge is if you want to go to all the top tier banks and all the top tier financial networks, they have their own shortlist. And in some cases, Lithuania isn't on there. In some cases, Malta isn't on there. And Gibraltar might not be on there. And so we didn't want to close any doors by picking the regulator. So we looked at who opens the most doors, and it was the Central Bank of Ireland. And that's largely why we went with that decision.
So, I mean, it sounds like before you even kind of got started, you had to do an enormous amount of research in terms of where the line of least resistance was for the proposition itself.
Yeah, I mean, ironically, it's probably where the line of least resistance to build the best proposition is also the line of most resistance in terms of getting it off the ground. Like we've gone the hard way, but I think it will stand the test of time. And we already seen that in the deals and the clients we are bringing on board. We're bringing them on board not because we have a front end platform. We're bringing them on board because we can give them an account in a country. We can give them a Polish account in Poland, or we can give them a Singapore dollar account, which they couldn't get in the location they want. Or we've got access to real-time payments in markets they didn't have access to because of connections to the banks. And so it is definitely the harder way. I've got friends who have built amazing businesses, and I've even built businesses on the back of, I guess we call them now embedded banking providers or BaaS providers in the past. And it's a great route to market. It just wasn't for us on this one.
So in terms of the companies that you're targeting, the client base, can you just sort of tell us a bit about what they look like and the sweet spot for you?
Yeah, so we solve three problems from a funds flow perspective. One is, do you have weak global banking? So we're not a bank, but there are services we can provide that augment your footprint. So you're in the UK, you're an e-commerce business, you want to launch in Sweden. Sounds like I'm obsessed with Sweden. It's just the example I've used most recently on a pitch this week. You know, you want to launch in Sweden. You're not going to go to Sweden and set up a Swedish bank account, but it would be beneficial for your business to have one. So we can give you an account that would act close enough to it. It would be in Sweden, accept funds in Swedish krona on the local rails. And so that would purely be from an e-commerce perspective. Then you have the payout side of things, and there are businesses today that struggle to send money all around the world because it's quite fragmented still. How do I pay people in this country versus this country? You have providers that solve it in Asia, or providers that solve it for e-wallets and real-time payments in some markets, or M-Pesa in Ghana, and Methods and Oxo in Mexico. But no one's brought that all together in one place. And so we want to provide a single API solution so that you can tap into all the best payment methods for paying individuals, whether that's overseas payroll, it might be pension payouts, it might be employee of record. Most of it is along the lines of marketplace sellers and downstream payouts. And if you combine those two flows together, you effectively get the marketplace flow, where there's a buyer and the marketplace and the seller. And that's what a lot of our customers look like. They have multiple parts of the payment stack. And we solve the problem for the collection accounts or the settlement account infrastructure, and then the downstream payouts. And if you solve that first part, it's just natural that you do the second part. In terms of what those customers look like in terms of size, we're not really solving a problem for mom and pop shops. They're mostly in the UK. They've got a bank account with Barclays, or they're in France and they bank with BNP. They don't need a Swedish account or a Singapore account. Not yet. Maybe one day they do. We're also not really solving a problem for multi-trillion-dollar businesses, because many of them have gone and done the hard yards. Many of them are regulated. Many of them are fintechs in their own right. They just don't share it. If you look under the hood of a business like Airbnb, they're a fintech. They just don't give it to anyone else to access their rails. So for us, it's everyone in between. You're doing 50 to 100 million of transaction volume overseas. You've either launched in new markets and made a bit of a hash out of it by partnering with too many, building this patchwork quilt of multiple providers, or you want to launch in new markets and you can't. We've all spoken to people who only have, your business is a marketplace, for example. You have one person in your payments team. That person can't dominate the roadmap to do all the payment stuff. So you stunt your growth by not being able to solve the payments piece. And so what we want to be able to say is we'll give you the payment stack that maybe someone like an Airbnb has built over 15 years, but give it to you way earlier so you can just remove that barrier to growth in new markets.
So when, going back to your Swedish example, you get paid in krona in Sweden, then basically from there to, like, if you're a UK company, from there to the UK bank account, that's just a sort of money transfer within your own business, is that?
Yeah, so the advantage of us building that infrastructure as well is that our Swedish account is connected to our UK account, and our UK account is connected to our French account. Sounds like I'm going to break into song, like the knee bone is connected to the leg bone here. But they're all connected. If you go and do it yourself, you go and bank with Svenska Bank or you bank with Nordea Bank, but they don't talk to each other. Ours do. So there's an optimization by being on our network as well. But what we do for a business, that in the example of Sweden, we do two things. One is they might actually not be receiving Swedish krona in their account. They might be receiving euros, and they need a Swedish krona account to turn on the ability to accept Swedish krona. Maybe it's from Klarna, maybe it's from someone else. So it enables them to get rid of FX losses they're currently incurring. And then they can either keep those funds in Sweden, or they can repatriate them to the UK, or maybe they actually have to pay someone in Sweden, or maybe it's a combination thereof, and we can help them with all three. So from a licensing perspective, we can work with customers anywhere in the UK and Europe in terms of sign up the entities there. We can pay out in over 140 currencies. And I used to say we could pay to 200 countries, and I was reliably told there aren't 200 countries. And everyone says in payments you can pay to 200 countries, but there aren't. There's like 189. But there's 200 jurisdictions. I think there's a few that kind of sit on the fence. But we can pay to pretty much every non-sanctioned country in the world. Appreciate that sanction list grows fairly regularly these days. So we can pay out anywhere in the world, and then we can collect funds and store funds on our accounts in circa 30 to 40 currencies, typically the main scheme currencies and the major currencies, but also some in secondary and tertiary markets, like Brazil, for example. For us, we want to collapse the difference between that 130 currencies and that 40 currencies number and bring back closer. It takes quite a bit of time and a lot more licenses to do that.
And in terms of your ambitions, how many countries are you looking to roll out to? I mean, like, how many countries will you need to get a license in?
Yeah, so we've kicked off the process in a couple of places, largely North America. Canada's one we're in the mix with at the moment. We're looking at the US. The US is funny because Europe is one license and access to 20 odd countries. America is 50 licenses and access to one country. So it's a fun one. And each of those places have different requirements and time lengths that you have to deal with. So it's not an overnighter. So that's why we're starting that process now. I think when you look across the rest of the world, we call it a hub and spoke approach. There's certain parts of the world where Singapore is one, where you go there and then through there you get access to kind of similar markets around Singapore. Same as with the UK and Europe, Canada and North America. So we always like to do one that gives us a kind of extendable footprint into other nearby markets. But the short answer is we want to be everywhere, but also we want to go where it makes the most sense for customers. If your customers are e-commerce businesses, you need to be in Asia and you need to be in North America and increasingly in Latin America as well.
Bamsh and I were at the Dubai FinTech Summit and we heard Nick Stronsky talk about how Revolut moves into new markets. And what was interesting is the vanguard is compliance. So they parachute a compliance team into the market. So are you taking a very similar approach? Like, I guess with North America, you've got to pick through the licenses for 50 states or whatever. Is that your approach as well? You start with compliance and move on from there?
Yeah, in terms of when you put down the start planting real flags, you have to go compliance first. I think there are ways, it would be insane for me to just pick a random country on the map and hire 10 people from compliance and just stick them there. So you need really high conviction to do that. And you can get that conviction through speaking to customers, your investors, partners. You can also, there are ways to test the market in other places before you get licensed. But largely speaking, once you actually go and put down roots, compliance is there first. No one wants to build a business, win clients, and then find out that they've done something wrong from a regulatory perspective and it all gets rug pulled from them. I've seen it happen in card screen businesses, cross-border businesses. All it takes is a memo from a Visa or a MasterCard, and all of a sudden the business model has to change overnight. So you have to do things the right way. Otherwise, you're just risking it long term. So it's always compliance. And every country is completely different. If you're in Dubai, you would have seen the number of people they're hiring from UK fintechs for compliance at the moment for eye-watering amounts. That made me wish I'd paid more attention to compliance and AML training back in the day. So it's a really big deal, and it's one you have to do. As difficult it is to find the people and get them in the first place, it's the right way to go about it.
As a business, you're pretty new as well, aren't you? And I was just kind of keen to understand how the origin story, like why did you get started? I mean, you've already rebranded as well. So just kind of keen to understand that as well.
Yeah, so there's that horrible saying, like it's a overnight success, 10 years in the making. I'm not saying we're a success yet, but I think the business idea was something you often think, I wonder what the idea is. And then one day you go, actually, it's everything we've been doing for 15 years and just doing it better and tying it together. And Aaron, my co-founder, who's the CEO, and I had worked together for a long time at various different businesses, TravelX, Western Union, Exaris, which was a card issuer. We worked in open banking. We'd seen the whole end of the ecosystem and saw the good parts. But I think it was the bad parts that led us to start Navro. It's when that moment when you join a business and you look under the hood and you're excited and hopeful, and then you realize that there's just so much debt, whether that's technical debt, culture debt, sometimes financial debt. This wasn't what I thought it would be. And you get to the point where you just inevitably decide you want to have a clean sheet of paper to build a business your way on. But you still need an idea. You can't just do it for fun. So we went out, and you'll be familiar with these expert networks like GLG and Alpha Sites and so on. We pretended to be investors on one of them, and we spoke to the heads of payments at 20 of the world's largest e-commerce businesses, pretending we were just doing some analysis, and asked them what their biggest problems were and built a shopping list off that. And that shopping list was basically our first deck for Navro. And then we emailed our first investor, who basically sent back unsubscribe, literally just those words. So we thought this is going to be quite hard. Then we emailed, we've been very lucky that Aaron and I had helped some people at lots of other businesses do well, sell them, exit, build them. And so we emailed that network, and they were thankfully a lot more generous with their time. And
unsubscribe, please.
Yes, yeah. Some did. We're grateful for the ones that didn't. So our initial investors were all angels and former execs, CEOs of businesses who were kind with their time. And then they in turn introduced us to VCs on their network. And then we did our first round. I think we closed it about this time 2 years ago. Up until 2 years ago, we were a PowerPoint with 2 people. We made our first 2 hires, technology and compliance, and have been building ever since. As I said, the hard decision we made was to build everything from scratch, which is great long term, very painful short term. Every day you realize there's something which is just table stakes for someone else that you have to go and build. And we've been very aggressive in building things fast and quickly, but also building them well. So they fit if our vision is quality for merchants, then our tech has to back it up as well.
So why, because my background's comms and Mark, why did you rebrand as well? Did you?
Yeah, a couple of reasons. One is we felt we didn't really own the word pay, and pay is quite limiting. We started off, our first product, actually our MVP, was paying people because we needed the license to be able to hold funds, to be able to sit on the money. And then so once we got that license, it felt like we'd outgrown just this concept of paying people. We were holding funds, reconciling, doing compliance, storing value. It was a deeper product. And we also just kind of fell a little bit out of love with our own name, to be honest. It was a name we hadn't spent a lot of time on it. We wrote it in a hotel lobby 2.5 years ago because we thought we were going to be a matrix of payments. And we said, I wonder if Patrex is available as a domain. And amazingly it was. And we snapped it up in 5 seconds. but we felt we'd kind of outgrown it. And so we wanted to come up with something that was our own. And then so went through a rebrand process. We picked the name again. We just didn't do it in a hotel lobby and spent more than 10 minutes. And Navro for us was, we talk a lot about helping business go into new markets. So we talk about businesses navigating their growth into new markets. So we basically took the word navigate, growth, bashed it together, and that was Navro, and a .com was available. And I'm probably sharing how the sausage was made a bit too much, but that's how we came up with it.
No, I really appreciate your honesty, because I mean, it for many people that may be a small thing, but for me, it's fascinating. I mean, you're right. Like Patrex is limiting, isn't it? Whereas Navro is much more aspirational. So it's really lovely to kind of hear your honesty around it. So thank you so much.
No, it's fine. Also, there's lots of pays out there, and it's hard to stand apart from them. So we wanted something that meant everything to us, but doesn't actually mean anything as well. And so we can imbue it with our meaning as opposed to having
That's really good insight, and really valuable for many other companies that just literally are looking at names that they can get because they can get the URL as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I wish we'd had ChatGPT when we came up with the names. So I think it's even probably easier to come up with some now using platforms like that.
Yeah, I kind of wonder what the world of branding is going to change so immeasurably. I mean, I just started using the 4.0 ChatGPT, which is like off the scale in terms of its communication abilities. But anyway, listen, Eddie, it's been really interesting. Thank you. We're sort of out of time. I don't know if Dharmesh has got a last question at all, but it's been fascinating to kind of hear your story so far, and we wish you luck, because I think it's so good always to hear about fintechs who have found a problem, identified what that problem is, researched how to kind of change things, and built around the research that they've done. So thank you. It's been great to hear what you're up to.
No, I appreciate you all taking the time. It's been fun to go down memory lane a little bit. And
No, I'd like to also say thank you, because I really need to get out of here and eat some food now, because we've talked about where there's all sorts of food. So, well, sausage.
yeah, I don't want to get a bill for a Chateaubriand for lunch on a Friday afternoon.
How much can go to Cosmo, the buffet?
Really appreciate it.
Brilliant. Thanks so much for your time, Eddie.
No, thank you for having me.
Thank you for tuning in to Dave and Dharm Demystify. We hope you enjoyed the show. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and tune in next time as we take another topic and demystify it.